being harsh towards ourselves or others is not going to resolve our own problems or whatever we feel that is holding us back. There's a third way. Hi, I'm Warren, the rector here at St. Columba's. Glad you could join me for my message of the day. I spoke last week of the tendency to fall into despair when we meet our own imperfections, or to seek a solution to those imperfections without ever sitting in the dust in hope, but to move on too quickly. To be able to sit there in hope is a dying art, and you have to have the resources to be able to do it. It's not just something that comes easily, which is why most of the time most of us move on too quickly or fall into some kind of despair or cynicism. If you want to hear a little bit more about that, check out my talk from last week. In the church, we have 2 designated times in the church's year when we explicitly sit in the dust in hope. We wait in the dust, if you like, of our own problems, our own imperfections, and that of the world's imperfections and problems. We wait in the case of Advent in the light of Christ's first coming, which is Christmas. So that's why Advent, which we're in now, always comes just before, the few weeks before Christmas, because we sit in the midst of our own failures in the light of Christmas. And at Lent, we do the same for Easter. For those 6 weeks before Easter, we sit in the dust of our own failures, but in the light of the death and resurrection of Jesus. And that's what's crucial here. You have to have the resources to be able to sit in hope. Otherwise, you move on too quick or you fall into despair. For example, the birth and the death and resurrection of Jesus are all about mercy. So when we sit in the dust of our own failure, we do so in the light of God's forgiveness and mercy. And that will help us not to end up hating ourselves or being too harsh on other people. And Jesus, the innocent Jesus, at Easter, so when we sit in the light of our own failures in Lent, we remember we're in the light of the death and resurrection of Jesus, and we remember that he was blamed by the crowds. And that tells us not to too quickly move away from the dust of our own failures by trying to blame others. We are led in the light of Christmas and Easter to wait and not blame ourselves or others, but to wait and hope for God's action. Because that's part of what Christmas is about. It reminds us to sit in the dust of our own imperfection at Advent, looking to Christmas. We're reminded that our imperfection, our incompleteness, if you like, as human beings, can't just be solved by ourselves. God's action is required. It's God's work. That gives me hope when I sit in the midst of my own failure and in the midst of our world's failure, that actually it's God's action and about God's business at Christmas. Also, sitting in the light of Christmas gives me joy as I sit in the dust. You think of the Christmas stories. There was plenty going on that was a problem, big problems in the Christmas stories, but the people at the birth of Jesus could still have joy. So I'm encouraged to keep a sense of joy even when I'm sitting in the midst of in the dust of my own failures. And in the light of Christmas, when we're sitting there reflecting on who we are and the state of the world, we look to the coming year in hope and trust. What God began in the birth of Jesus is being completed in us through the Spirit of Jesus. That gives me hope. God's work begun in Christ is being completed in the Spirit of Jesus. I haven't been left alone, so to speak. So as I patiently in the year to come learn to daily die and rise with Christ through prayer and fellowship and love of others, I can do that in the hope of Christmas because God has come amongst us, and God's work won't be left undone, but will be completed. Thanks for joining me. Bye-bye.